Hi everyone, and welcome to the July edition of ChangeMakers on Tuesdays. Thank you, Paroma, for that uplifting musical choice. Welcome everyone from around the country. We'll start, as we always do, by acknowledging the country we're on and traditional owners and elders past, present and emerging. I'm here in Brisbane, so I'm on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people. And you might like to drop in the chat where you're joining us from and the land you're joining us from as well. Thanks so much for joining us for another edition. We've got two fantastic speakers today. We're going to mix the order up a little bit. We normally do our guest speaker first and our community of the month second, but due to some scheduling challenges, we're going to swap that around. And so I'm very pleased to introduce our community of the month first this meeting. And we're very lucky to be joined by Jessie Sleep, who's the Chief Executive of Far West Community Partnerships from the very far west region of South Australia. Thanks, Paroma. We'll kill the title slide so we can see Jessie. Welcome, Jessie.
Hello everyone, thank you for the invite to join us this month.
And now, Jessie, you've got a pretty busy day. There's a whole lot of action in your community today, so you're under a bit of time pressure and there's a lot of background noise, so we'll do as best we can. But thank you so much for squeezing us in today. Firstly, tell us about the far west region of South Australia. It's centred basically around the town of Ceduna, but it's a pretty enormous area, isn't it?
It is actually one of the communities, Up Mallee on the Maralinga lands, makes up 12% of South Australia's land mass, so a huge amount. And I'm coming live from our Happy, Healthy, Wealthy Festival for the Far West region. So apologies if there's any background noise. The band started up a little early, so I've scurried away to a quiet. Yeah, so we've got 5 communities in our region, Ceduna, Kiniva, Scott Desco, Yallata and Oak Valley. Collectively, across the region, we have approximately 2,000 Aboriginal people in our region and about 8,000 to 10,000 people completely. So we make up, don't quote me on my maths, because it's never been my strong point, but approximately 30% Indigenous population. Very unique makeup with our communities. Yeah, sorry, I think it's worth noting to say that whilst we've got 5 communities in our region, they're rather diverse, differing levels of traditionalism across our cultural aspects, as well as very different demographical and geographical areas. So when we visit our furthest community, it's about a 6 to 7 hour drive to get out there.
Yes, it's a really massive area. I guess the first question that pops into mind: how did you all come together to put together your place-based initiative when the communities are so far flung?
We have quite a long history in our region. Obviously, with our Aboriginal population, it goes back many thousands of years in terms of traditional geography. Cultural movements across the different tribal groups, the fact that most of the groups across the region are related in some manner, so you can't go to one community without running into someone you're related to, and that's the diversity. If you sort of take the region and have a look at those demographics, you can to a larger version across the region with just different communities that people live in. We're quite a transient region as well, so quite a large population number move between the communities throughout the different seasons in the year. So historically, relationship between the communities from that aspect, but also, as with a lot of place-based collective impact initiatives, there was a catalyst that pushed us towards formalising the partnership that we have between us. And you know, I know we're not the only community that suffers from intergenerational social and health disadvantage, but we got to a point in our history approximately 11 years ago where we had a coronial inquest into the deaths of 6 people. It was called the Sleeping Rough Inquiry. So these 6 community members across our region had passed away while they were sleeping rough for what the coroner named as preventable deaths. One of his key findings in the inquest was that a lack of service collaboration and partnership between the communities was a contributing factor to that. And at this point, informally, our leadership between the communities had been coming together for a number of the various reasons that I spoke about just before. But it really was a catalyst for our leadership to say, no, we need to come together formally to do something about this. We can't continue to allow our community members to advantage to a point where this is occurring. So formally, the leaders of the 5 communities came together along with their community boards to form the Far West Leaders Group, which is our overarching governance structure for the region, which is then complemented by the individual governance structures in the community. And where we come along is after 9 years of significant work by these leaders doing it themselves, putting all the hard yards, creating better outcomes for our communities. We very kindly got the offer from Stronger Places, Stronger People and Empowered Communities to join their initiatives. I believe the offer from Stronger Places, Stronger People did come first, and the very initial feedback from our leaders group was this is a great to ensure that we're bringing our whole region along for the journey, not just isolating one community, which really does speak to the maturity, but also the level of deep connection between our communities, that we don't want to move forward into a future without each other. So that's where our backbone was born from.
For those of you who've just joined us, a couple of people just come in. Jessie Sleep is our guest, and unusually we're doing the Community of the Month in our first segment today. Jessie's joining us from the Far West region of South Australia, and Jessie's the Chief Executive of Far West Community Partnerships. If you've got a question that you'd like to put to Jessie, please drop it in the chat and we'll come to you, and you can come off mute and put your question to Jessie. So Jessie, what's pretty unique, I think, about the Far West is that you've got pretty much all the place-based programs going at a national level are happening in your community. So you've got Empowered Communities, you've got Stronger Places, Stronger People. You've also got Connected Beginnings, I think, do you not? So how's that going? Is that a benefit, having all those things working at the same time?
Absolutely. Initially, it was very much a learning curve for our community. We sort of went from having no place-based initiatives, doing a lot of things off of our own back, to having 3 individual sets of investment from the government. And to note as well, we've also got the New Directions program, which is an offshoot of Connected Beginnings that sort of comes after the first. So there's a lot going on, and coordination was really key. I think a point of success for us is the fact that for the past 11 years, we've been working really hard at reforming what collaboration and coordination looks like in our region. So it was a smaller step for us to start looking at working under these initiatives. I have to admit, early on, it was really hard for me to see the alignment to initiatives, but I think that's the learning curve that we all took along, is that essentially we're all heading towards the same aspirations. The journey to get there is slightly different. It also brings different resourcing and different lessons. But I can look back 2 years, we're 2 years almost to the week. Last year was our 2-year anniversary for our backbone. And I can say that I can truly see the effectiveness and the efficiency that's been created in our region by being able to take the best of both worlds from these they're similar initiatives, but they come with very different and very similar aspirations, but very different ways of achieving it. I often talk about Empowered Communities brings the empowerment and the governance layer to what a place-based initiative needs to look like, and Stronger Places, Stronger People really complements that by ensuring that we're including the grassroots movements in the work that we're doing, and we create a line of sight from our governance programs all the way down to individuals around in the community. I believe it is quite unique, but I believe there's a lot to learn from a lot of other communities and place-based initiatives on how we can really look at the best parts of a lot of different learnings and to apply them together to create, it's not just genuine collaboration and consultation with the community, it's also looking at what a sustainable like. Often what I see when I'm working with other regions or even other services within our region is there's a real focus on the short-term immediate solutions without the understanding of the long game, and really ensure that your short-term solutions are weaving into your long-term solutions and not working against it. It's quite easy when you are reactive in the work you do within a community to enable a lot of the problems, and your focus turns on dealing with side effects of an issue and not allow communities or services or individuals down to what's at the core of elements that you need to change.
Do drop your questions for Jessie in the chat. Apparently I'm having a little bit of sound problems, so if my sound's a little bit off, my apologies, but we'll keep going. I'll see if I can fix that. So Jessie, in terms of just going a little bit further on that theme, you're working across cultures and across sort of multiple cultures, if you think of the different First Nations that are part of your region. And last time we were all together, you and others in the room were talking very powerfully, I think, about that middle space between sort of mainstream ways of working and cultural ways of working, and how we've all got to meet in that middle space and come together to execute our strategies. I just thought that was very powerful analysis. Tell us, share a little bit more with the group about that thinking.
I've actually prepared a small visual actually to support this conversation that you'll see in the chat. I've provided a copy to have a look at that. But if you bear with me for a moment, I'll just attempt to share my screen. My tech's not the best at the moment. So just give me a moment. Because that middle space, or what we call the neutral or shared space, really is an important part of what we're talking. Actually having a little bit of trouble with my Roma, if you would mind sharing the visual that I've provided earlier. And it's just the second page that we're focusing on. But what we essentially, when historically you talk about the interaction of dominant cultures and minority cultures, and this can be applied across the text. I'm not sure if you guys can see this is on here. Yeah. So you look at it, and in this context, we're talking about an Aboriginal context and a non-Aboriginal context. And we talk about working within a middle space where everyone can exist on their own terms, but also where it needs to go. People can bring their own individuality, and they can bring their identity and the work that they need to do to a neutral place where we can put what we need to put aside, but work together towards shared aspirations. So the first step into the work that we do works against a common assumption that both the contexts that come together at the table share equal power and capacity. But in reality, perceived or otherwise, is that there's a historically dominant context that influences the shared space. So the first step that we work to when we're talking about working in a community-led context and existing in that middle space is to take the steps on building capacity and empower governance and determination, where we can create an environment where both circles are the same size. So what in the graphic is, when we bring a dominant and a non-dominant context together, is you've got a smaller circle and a larger circle. Building work with both sides is to increase the size of the non-dominant circle, and at the same time with it also reduces the size of the dominant circle. And that's really the first step that you need to take if you want genuine and sustainable partnerships, relationships, collaborations, and any of the work in the middle space, is to space where both contexts can work together towards those shared aspirations. And that's when a change agenda, a theory of change really come to the picture. One of the benefits that we have in our region to initiatives, Stronger Places, Stronger People, Empowered Communities, the role of Far West Community Partnerships is circles, but we've been able to combine the theory of having a shared agenda for change with a regional development agenda. So at the shared aspirations, we understand what our broader work is to create real change in local and wider systems. And those broad aspirations that we have in our region is to be happy, healthy, wealthy, looking at that terminology in terms of being happy doesn't just mean smiling, being healthy doesn't mean having a full bill of health, and being wealthy doesn't mean money in your pockets. It's looking at what are those inherent things that create happiness across a number of different contexts. Happiness in terms of being connected, being supported, having something that you can contribute to, being healthy in terms of physical health across our different cultural groups. And wealthy is understanding and having access to and maintaining and working within the thing we have. Where the development agenda comes into play, what's the capacity building and the investment work that needs to occur in both of the contexts of the non-Aboriginal to help increase the Aboriginal context circle and to reduce the non-Aboriginal context circle so that we can come together with equal power and equal work.
And the discussion that flowed from this diagram, I think it's such a beautiful, it's beautiful in its simplicity, but also its sophistication, is that understanding that while non-Aboriginal people and Aboriginal people will try and adapt as best they can to work in the other context, this middle space doesn't require you to leave who you are behind. It's recognising that you are who you are, whether you're non-Indigenous, whether you're a government worker, whether you're an Aboriginal person. It allows you to turn up in that space as you are and who you are, but it provides a framework for working together. So tell us a little bit more about that, because that was a pretty powerful part of the conversation.
Yeah, and reflecting back on the conversation, I think the takeaway for a very long time having a dirty concept. But in reality, if you don't have skin in the game, you're not going to bring everything to the table to truly interact. So it's about creating a neutral space where there's honesty, transparency, everything can be on the table. It's okay to get out of a conversation or a partnership what you need, but it's about the mutual contribution and the mutual relationship in terms of you're also supporting the other side of the table. And if we want to be sustainable and we want to ensure that we're genuinely supporting regions and communities to develop, we can't do that on our own. So there needs to be an exchange. And the second takeaway was the importance of relationships. It's showing up when sometimes there's nothing for you to gain or nothing for you to receive, but everything for you to give and contribute. And it's moving away from the old adage that governments come in to help communities and do for them and give to communities, and working towards the concept that real change starts with a mutual where we both give and we both take, but we both understand why everyone's there and what that shared aspiration is that we move towards.
Now, Jessie, I know you've got to go because we can hear everything that's going on in the background.
Apologies for the noise.
We might just take that slide down, Paroma. I guess the last question, which I'd like to know your answer to, is if your work is really successful and in 3 or 5 years' time, what do you think you'd be most proud of in your region?
I think if we were successful in, say, 5 years' time, what I would be most proud of is creating an environment and a region where we have connection. You're not always going to see results in everything you're working on. In fact, some of the broader aspirations you may never achieve, but it's actually the journey of working towards it. And if we can get to a point where already are coming on the journey with us, and the way that we sort of describe what our journey, you've got a future, but you need to revert back from what you think that is to ensure everyone's coming on that journey. So before people buy into what they need to have hope for the future. Through hope for the future, they need to see themselves in that picture. Backwards from that is we need to create an environment where people are happy, healthy, wealthy, that allows them to be able to actively contribute and participate in the future that we're creating. So the two parallels that need to be created. We focus on our environment, we focus on our health indicators, we focus on the things we want to change systemically, and at the same time we need to create happiness, wealth and health in a community so that our current and future generations can actively participate. And if we can create a situation where we're collectively working together on that, I think that's what I would be most proud of. today in itself, I think, is probably the pinnacle of our year, because we've managed to bring the 5 communities during our second week of NAIDOC celebrations to celebrate what being happy, healthy and wealthy looks like. And we're really excited to be able to launch this festival to be able to really promote and bring everyone together to celebrate that. I wish I could take the laptop out and actually show you all what it looks like at the moment, because it's a really wonderful site.
Well, Jessie, thank you so much for taking time out of that, the mad day you must be having. It's such a sophisticated model and set of thinking that's going into your work, and we can't wait to see how it evolves over coming years. So would everyone join with me in thanking Jessie Sleep?
Thank you, and thanks for the invite. Hopefully you'll have me back again.
All the best, Jessie. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the session, everyone.
Thanks, Jessie. We will go to our breakouts as we normally do. So this gives people an opportunity to have a discussion with just a couple of other folks on the call to learn what's happening around the country and hopefully meet someone you haven't met before. So Primary will put us into breakouts. And while they're doing that, I'll chase up our other guest speaker today, Professor Sharon Goldfeld from the Centre for Community Child Health at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. So you have a brief chat, maybe about 5 minutes, introduce each other, yourselves to each other. And when we come back, we'll have Sharon on the call. So I'll see you in about 5. Hi, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully had a good chat to some colleagues from around the country and met someone you didn't know or learnt something you didn't know. Who met someone they didn't already know? Hands up. Great. That's exactly what ChangeMakers on Tuesdays is about, hooking people up with really fantastic things going on in the country. The administrators in our little chat room were just having a discussion about just how impressive that framework is that they've got going in the Far West and Ceduna. It's only a tiny little town. Ceduna is only about 5,000 people, and those surrounding communities are even smaller. And just the sophistication of practice and thinking that they've got going there is really, really quite something. And particularly in that the First Nations and mainstream working together framework, it's really, I can see some great things coming out of that community. So sorry about the sound quality before, but hopefully that's fixed and we're up and away. So welcome back from the break, and I'm very pleased to welcome and introduce my long-term colleague and friend, Professor Sharon Goldfeld. Sharon's the Director of the Centre for Community Child Health at the Royal Children's Hospital, Melbourne. And I think many of you know Sharon or know of Sharon, and I think it's absolutely not an understatement to say Sharon's really been a leader in thinking and practice around child wellbeing in Australia now for some decades. So we're very privileged to have Sharon along today. Welcome, Sharon.
Thanks very much.
And thank you for the last minute change of plans. Sharon was going to be on first, but as we found out, there was a massive NAIDOC celebration going on in Ceduna. So thank you for your understanding in the reschedule, Sharon. So most people, I think, would have heard of the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and I think everyone's heard of the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, but maybe just give us a bit of a background on the Centre for Community Child Health and how the Research Institute and the Centre for Community Child Health interact. Just give us a bit of background about those really important institutions, Sharon.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew, and thank you very much. Just acknowledging that I'm on the land of the Weatherill people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and any First Nations people here with us today. And also thank you for inviting me, Matthew, to this really important group that meets regularly, which I didn't know about. So I'm very excited that you guys do that. So the Centre for Community Child Health has been around for about close to 30 years now. It was originally started, the foundational director is Frank Oberclade, who many of you will know, and I took over in late 2019. So note to self, do not take on a job as a new director during a pandemic, somewhat challenging. So that was a bit challenging. But I've been in the centre for about 25 years as a paediatrician and researcher. And the centre is unusual. It's kind of got a couple of legs. It's got a kind of a foot in the children's hospital. So we actually see children with developmental and behavioural problems. My own specialty, I still see children. I think the N of one and still making a difference to a child and a family still sits very close to my heart. And so I still see kids, and my specialty is children who soil and wet themselves. So I'm a bit of the poo queen, really. And the other foot we have is in the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. So we sit in population health, and we have research groups, but we are kind of one centre with those 2 feet in both camps, and a relationship with the University of Melbourne. So it makes us both unique, I think, in terms of being able to have the clinical as well as the research aspects, but also means I think we get really fabulous inputs from a range of multidisciplinary folk across the whole institute, including we have training and development. We also have knowledge translation. And I think the centre has been really thinking very deeply about its role in making a difference for children. We've just recently done a sort of piece of work looking at our purpose and our mission statement, which has been a really interesting exercise. I'm sure if any of you have gone through this, you'll know it's always very challenging on bringing a diverse organisation around a central kind of understanding. And so we've got our purpose, which is for every child to thrive, but our mission is actually to make an equitable real life improvement in children's health, development and wellbeing within a generation. And we kind of chose within a generation out of a sense of urgency. And we've kind of seen, we were kind of involved with the initial rollout and beginnings of the Australian Early Development Census. And you'll know that we've been reporting on that, and the most recent is 2021. And essentially we've seen no change in the inequalities in children's development as they start school since 2009, and it was probably before then. And so there comes a point in time, doesn't there, and I'm sure you all feel this urgency, we go, we can just keep reporting this, or we go, how on earth are we going to actually fundamentally make a difference to what is essentially the Australian problem, which is an equity problem? So that's kind of where we've positioned the centre and said, what can we do, particularly for children in the primary years, so kind of 0 to 12 is going to be a fundamental game changer. That's kind of where we are now. And I'll stop there because you can say we just yatter on forever, Matthew, and then it'll be the end. See you later.
Sorry, just struggling with the mute button. So tell us a little bit more about your view. If you think about where are we at with child wellbeing in Australia, we've got the AEDC, obviously, which is, I think I'm right in saying, a fairly unique instrument in terms of the Western world. Have we struggled to make change on those wellbeing measures more or less than other countries? I mean, we actually have a measure that tells us how we're going, which puts us in front of some other countries. How do you think we're going, with some international comparators? And how do you think we're going in terms of looking around the country, serious efforts to do something about it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So you're right, the AEDC, I think, has been a game changer. And we're the only country in the world that has it nationally. So other countries have it in various bits and bobs, but no one has it nationally. So I think in terms of changing the narrative and giving people a kind of tool for talking about children as they start school, I think that's what the AEDC has done. It has definitely shone a light on young children. It's definitely shone a light on inequity, but as you can see, shifting it is a whole different proposition. And what's become clear is that it is not a trivial pursuit. And I think the more we try and silver bullet the solutions, the less success we're likely to have. So if you look around how we go against other countries, it depends on what you're looking at. So from an inequality point of view, we're pretty awful. If you look at the top end of how our kids are doing okay. Look at the bottom end, not so good. So if you look at us compared to inequalities in other countries, particularly high-rich countries, we don't do so well. The Nordic countries are obviously where everyone will be surprised about some other countries where we just do worse than, and we do worse in education than many, many other countries. So we're kind of we're in the bottom third of countries for education, taking into account preschool, primary school and secondary school. So I think we punch well below our potential rate. We have a lot of interesting things in Australia that should put us ahead of that. You know, we have a pretty good safety system for families. It's not brilliant, but it's not too bad. But we seem to fail to deliver on families, the variability of family need. And we seem to have this complete love of single interventions. I think for all of you working on the ground, this is what you're all trying to think about, which is how do we kind of start bringing together some of these things in a way that makes sense for families. We've been talking about this idea of stacking things, so moving away from single interventions. But interesting times, isn't it? You know, if we'd had this conversation even a year ago, we might be having a different conversation. I think the Labor government promises federally are really interesting. The early years strategy, the commitment to affordable childcare, the narrative itself, you know, a wellbeing budget, et cetera, kind of interesting times. And then within each of our states and territories, you know, look what's happening in New South Wales and Victoria. It feels like we're on the edge of something that could either have us kind of getting off and flying, which is going like this and falling off into some sort of abyss. So it feels like a really exciting moment. And I think the challenge is how do we get a collective kind of view on what needs to happen, and number one, get some high level agreement on 2 or 3 things, and then number 2, what sort of experimentation we'll be doing in place that's accelerating our effort, because we can't do it everywhere all at once. That's just not possible. But in my view, place remains the most important place. Things in place remain the most important place for us to be experimenting to really accelerate our ability to address inequity.
You've got some grand plans you're going to share with us in a moment, but I'll just invite anybody who might like to put a question to Sharon, just drop it in the chat and we'll come to you. But while you're thinking about questions you might like to put to Sharon, I've got one more. Look, it's my long-held observation, I guess, rather than view, but it's an observation that I've often made that, you know, we seem to know a lot about how kids grow and develop through different ages and stages of early development. And what's more, we can point to really effective interventions that someone has pulled off somewhere on those issues. It just seems that we don't do those things in a very organised way consistently. And that always gives me hope, even though it's been it's a problematic story. It gives me hope because we know a lot about how kids grow. We know a lot about the sort of supports that you can put in place that make a difference. And so it's an execution problem. Is that too simplistic? Do you have that view?
I suspect many people around this table have that view, and I feel a little bit fraudulent because we've got excellent people sitting around this table, many of whom I know or know me, who would have much to say in this space. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to trivialise that, the amount of effort required to actually translate evidence into the way we do business. And I think it's really hard, and we're trying to do it in some of the projects we're doing, and it's really hard. And you're often doing it against system, there's a lot of system barriers in the way. So you're pushing up. So that requires a lot of energy to be able to do that. And then there are just kind of weird things that happen, like, we've done this randomized control trial of right at home, we can't get it up, and it's like, well, what else do you need to do? So there's kind of a whole lot of dissonances that don't make sense. And then there's just, how do you get a whole system to change the way that's already funded, to change the way it does business? That is just so tricky. And I know, Michael's trying to do it, and Tara's trying to do it through SPSP, and June's doing it, so the people are doing it in various ways. The challenge, of course, is what are we learning from that, and how do we scale it? And man, if we can nail that, if we can work out how to both scale deep, so work out how to do things in community, scale wide, so that we're actually doing things and learning from each other pretty quickly, and then scale up so that we're actually pushing up on the system so it changes. If we can pull that off, that will be, I think, a global template, because that's kind of what needs to happen. And even And this is my, I think our collective challenge. Even if we did fabulous things in 50 communities in Australia, it's not going to fundamentally change inequities at a population level. And that's not to say we shouldn't do fabulous things in 50 communities, but it's necessary but not sufficient. And I feel that if we can get sufficient momentum learning at scale, and they do it in business, if you're asking Coca-Cola to spread Coca-Cola, believe me, we would all be drinking, they can do it, businesses can do it. And I think what can we learn from that, taking into account we're dealing with human beings and the needs of families. So I'm not suggesting that's not important, but that's to me the kind of, God, how do we do this? I don't know, but we just got to go faster because, every year so many families are being born into adversity, and then it goes year after year after year. And as I said, do you just keep watching the statistics, or do you go, man, we've just got to do something different? That's the definition of insanity, and you keep doing the same thing, expect a different outcome. And I think COVID has given us permission to disrupt.
Sharon, you've got some ideas to share, and then you've got a couple of slides. I think you're going to share your end, you're not. But folks, I put this challenge to Sharon to say if she was appointed a benevolent dictator of Australia with a mandate to make things better for kids, what would you do? And so we're about to have a little glimpse at Sharon's answer to that provocation.
And I guess it comes from this notion of how do we kind of do this scaling bit, because I think I do want to say one thing. There are some really big policy levers that we're going to need to pull at some stage, and that might be about giving families more money. We wouldn't want to take those social determinants off the table and pretend they don't matter. But the question is, could we kind of test some of those hypotheses in a way that kind of makes sense? So I'm going to share my screen and, hope it works for the, reasons that we always hope it works. So can you guys see that okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so this is just the Centre for Community Child Health. I just thought these are our priorities and our values, and I'm happy to share these slides. We talked about that already. So in our place-based work in the centre, we've kind of got two aspects we think about, and I put this in as a prequel to where I think we might go, with an idea that, certainly Michael Hogan will be familiar with this next proposal, but so in our work in the centre, and we've been thinking very hard about what is our role in the centre as opposed to the very wonderful people around this table. Each of us has a role. And so there's two bits. One is this idea that we've been working with for about 15 years. It might be traumatising June right now because I think she was involved with it to start with, about this idea of platforms, which is essentially how do we add value to helping communities have this conversation about starting their roadmap for making a difference for children. And then complementing that is this kind of data-driven and evidence-based approach. How do we address inequities using innovation, using implementation science, and this idea of stacking, and trying to build all of that together. And can I say, I'm not sitting here going, well, we've got all the answers, sit back and relax. This is the kind of way we've been thinking. However, you will know that lately the Lego Foundation put out a call, and it was a really interesting moment in time to think about, what is that? What would we like to do if someone handed you sort of 45 or so million dollars Australian, what would you do with it? And so this is kind of our narrative to be pulled apart, of course, at any stage. But I guess if they give us $45 million, we're on the right track. So this is the narrative that's kind of, we know that about 1 in 5 kids arrive at school already developmentally vulnerable, which is a massive number of children. And we know they're already unevenly distributed by the time they get to school. And can I say, the only thing that happens at school are those inequalities get worse. So there's nothing about school that, at a population level closes that gap, for a much longer conversation about whether it should. We know we're putting more and more money into services and into investment in all sorts of ways across Australia. And we know that in most areas there are sufficient numbers of services. Not saying in some communities we don't have enough. We know there's issues in remote. But in general, there is this kind of raw material that's kind of out there. So this is the proposition that we put forward, and this is what Matthew suggested I might share as a provocation, I guess. As I said, it's certainly not the answer to everything, but it's a kind of really interesting story. So this idea of moving beyond silver bullets. So the idea is, could we stack 10 interventions? That is, everybody gets all of those interventions, and you can see they're arranged both across the life course. This is only 0 to 5 because that's what the grant was for, but I would say you need to do it 0 to 8. And then you can see it's a combination of things targeting children, families, and at the community level. And these are 10 things that for which there's reasonable evidence and for which we put together. There would be a debate about what those 10 things could be got the money, but you can see they go all the way to giving people money, green spaces, digital navigators, digital space, right through to playgroups, mental health care, etc. So what about if everybody could get all those 10 things? So that's one part of the intervention. The second is using co-design for implementation. So let's not pretend that trying to implement this in one area of Victoria will be the same as what it would look like in rural New South Wales, because it won't. Doesn't mean that 10 things aren't important, but actually implementing it requires co-design. And the third thing is using data and indicators to drive system improvement, because we know a lot of our system improvement work is blind to data. So it doesn't have the data needed to actually go fast, which is how systems actually improve. So they're the three elements of the intervention. And then rather than just go, we really like this, we're going to test it. So we've got Gen V, which is a whole of state cohort being recruited in Victoria. So we can actually set up this as a trial. So some communities would be randomised to do this and others would be the observation communities to start with. So you could actually see what's happening, compare. And then Origins, which is in Western Australia, they would be before and after. So what do kids look like before and what do they look like after? They've got very deep data in one area of WA. And then, because that's not aspirational enough, is the idea is within a year to scale. So start using our scaling platforms in Queensland and WA. So these are communities already being set up for looking at this. And Tara, I didn't get a chance to talk to you because I went very quickly, but SPS could be another side here. So scale quite quickly. So we don't wait for, this is not a static process. We get perfect and we scale it. This is scale, learn, scale, learn, scale, learn as we're going along. So this is the dream, and I have no idea whether we'll be successful. The most likely outcome is not successful. This is a global call. So we're a high income country. I don't know how attracted they're going to be to that, but we think if we could pull this off, it would have global implications. So we find out end of this month, next month, whether or not we get to the second stage. So that's whether or not we get $1 million to write the business plan, and then there's 10 people, and then I think 6 people or 6 organisations or consortium get money. But I guess it's and I think this is why Matthew wanted me to bring this up. It's a test. Like, we could do this now, just need money. And I say this also that, people say to me, oh yeah, great. I go, but you just need to know, I've got no idea how we'll pull this off. I just think it'd be interesting to try. To the point, where we do have most of the infrastructure we need. We don't, all the money, by the way, was for 2 things. One was each community actually had a person driving this. What we know is without a person driving these things, nothing happens. And then second of all was to create a technical solution to measuring child development. So we weren't reliant on going and measuring each child, but actually find a technical solution so that digitally you'd be able to actually measure children's development through parents on their phone. Again, not sure how we're going to do that, but we put some money in to do that because that would just have enormous implications across the whole country. So that's the dream. I'll stop there and I'll stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Sharon. We've spoken a couple of times in the ChangeMakers Forum about what an extraordinary moment that we might be at as a country, because there's a whole lot of interest in the early years. The Prime Minister's said that he wants to leave as one of his main legacies is a universal early years system behind, but I don't know that that's coloured in yet. What that looks like, I don't think is determined. So we've got a pretty exciting moment to try and shape that agenda with these sorts of ideas. And I think the sort of comprehensiveness of that concept that you've just put forward, it'd be fantastic if philanthropy can, through the Lego Foundation, get behind that, because it gives you so much freedom to do what needs to be done. But to your point, I mean, the nation has the resources to do projects like that if it wanted to. So I think it could be really exciting 3 to 6 months as we shape up behind some of these opportunities. Now, Leanne Clausen had a question while you were talking. Leanne had a question about the child protection system. Leanne, do you want to come off mute and put your question to Sharon?
Yeah, so basically, it's quite scary, the amount of children, when you have a look at the statistics of the amount of children in Australia who have some type of connection with the child protection system in one way or the other. And I sort of feel I'm interested in your opinion about having a more nationalised approach instead of state-based approach to child protection for our children, because the different states have all the different legislation. In one place it's one thing, in one place it's another. Some families are interstate, so they come to me with issues in Queensland, but then they also have one of their children's in Victoria. You know, and I feel that we need more of a national approach to child protection, where it's one lot of legislation, one lot of laws for all of child protection, to help families understand the system more, to help our children better, because we'd have things in place more nationally than just state-based, and to keep families together more. So I'm just interested in your opinion.
Oh, thank you so much, Leanne. You know, there are some things that feel just innately stupid. And the fact that we have states and territories sort of each sort of having different rules for these, you know, just these families living in so much adversity. And, you know, Leanne, I have a PhD student who's just finished, and we're particularly interested in the access to healthcare for children out of home care. And there actually is, interestingly, a national framework that nobody uses. Quite fascinating, isn't it? And so children are supposed to see a GP within 30 days, and sort of less than 50% of kids do. And they're supposed to see a paediatrician within 3 months, and only 30% did. So there's, you know, these are the most vulnerable children. You couldn't throw enough money at this system to say it was too much money, because the costs are so great at the other end. And yet we haven't managed to do that. We don't really address those social determinants head on. So I think having something national that was consistent, that was operationalised. Sure, you have to operationalise things at a state level. And I think there's bits of that, but no one's kind of taken it by the horns and gone. Yes. And whether this new framework will do it, I don't know, because people like to hold on, don't they, to their...
I would like to create a national framework for parents, so that in every state you can go and have a look, and you can see everything in your state and what's on there, and that's what I'm trying to achieve. Because I have so many different parents come to me that are interstate and have these different issues, and I know everything about Queensland legislation, but then I'm dipping into the other states to try to figure out how to help these parents.
Thanks so much for your question, Leanne. June, you've also got a question around parent and adult support.
Yeah, hi Sharon, that was lovely. Nice to see you again after such a long time. I think the framework's great. One of the pieces that we are working on around with our place, and we have a view that parenting programs is not enough. It's not just about parenting. For a lot of our families, it's about their individual personal development and capability and opportunities for experiences that they have not had, and how important that is in their capacity to raise a family. And education is at the core of that. It's not just straight education. Health and wellbeing, as you've pointed out, is absolutely fundamental to everything. But yeah, so have you got any thoughts on that?
I mean, clearly, yes, you're absolutely right. You know, as I said, we don't know what those final 10 things will be. I only made up 10 because it sounds better saying 10 and 20 communities than 11 and 14 communities. Just doesn't sell. But, you know, there might end up being 11, who knows? But I think it's kind of building that out with sufficient evidence and then working out what should everybody get, what should some people get, and, you know, building all of that out. And to me, a lot of that would sit in the hub work, you know, in terms of the hubs, what goes inside the hub that meets the needs of the population. So in some, they might need more around adult education, and others it might be about something else. I don't know the answer to that, but that would be the place where you could try and work out what's needed for that particular community. Because you're right, that's an important part of it. In June, it's interesting you bring that up. We've just come up with this, I think, quite a wild idea anyway, for women who have been notified to child protection in pregnancy. What if we gave them everything, like threw everything at them, including free housing, free access to someone who can come and help them cook. But part of it is, June, this is looking at Maslow's hierarchy. What do these women essentially need to become resilient, empowered individuals? Yep. Because that's how they're going to be better parents.
Yep,
they're not going to be better parents because we waft.
Yep.
Because it's not going to be better parents because we waft programs over them.
Yep.
It's going to be because we've built them up to be empowered individuals, and that will lead to the parenting that is needed. Yeah. To so I've got this kind of. Shall I show it to you? We got time? I'll just show you this diagram I've been playing with because I'd love it.
We're at time, really. Sharon.
Right, so I won't show you. But anyway, just trying to look at Maslow's hierarchy. And for these women, you kind of have to start at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, which is if you don't have a safe place to live and if you don't have regular food available for you, how on earth are you going to go up Maslow's hierarchy? I mean, you just can't.
We are out of time. Sharon, thank you so much for sharing those really inspiring, exciting ideas. All the best of luck with the Lego Foundation. And we'd love to see your voice right in the midst of things as the new early years agenda gets shaped up with the federal government. So please join with me in thanking Sharon for her thoughts and leadership in the sector over such a long period of time. Thanks so much, Sharon.
Thanks for having me.
We'd like to see you back. And just before we go, next month, the August edition, we're going to have Jay Weatherill back. Jay was our very first guest speaker on ChangeMakers on Tuesdays. He's going to talk to us about the state of play in the National Early Years Agenda and the huge announcements and successes that the Thrive by 5 campaign has driven. So Jay's our guest speaker in August. So I hope to see you back in August. Another very exciting thing that's happening is a visit from friends in Canada. Michael Hogan, can you do a 10-second advertisement for the Palix Foundation tour of Australia?
Yep. Thank you, Matthew. So some folks will be aware of the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative. So Nancy Mannix, who's the chair and patron of the Palix Foundation and the instigator behind the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative, will be in Australia for a week or so in the middle of August. Certainly folks in Queensland and in Canberra and maybe Sydney will get a chance face to face. But we'll let you know some more details, but keep an eye out and we'll do some, we might share some of those invites, Matthew, through the ChangeMakers list, and people who are interested can find a way to spend some time with Nancy, which will be fantastic to draw on her experience doing catalytic systems leadership and investment work.
Fantastic, Michael. Yeah, a whole of state rollout of a neuroscience program that delivered huge changes for kids and families in Canada. So lots to learn there. That's it for July. We'll see you again in August. Stay well, and thanks for joining us at ChangeMakers. See you, everyone.